Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Welcome to the um, April 2024 Cascade Mycological Society meeting with invited speaker Dr. Mike Amaranthus. Tonight's speaker is a world-renowned mycorrhizal scientist who has even had several mushroom species and two mushroom genera named after him. He's been the recipient of the United States Department of Agriculture's highest award for scientific achievement, and Dr. Mike has a BS from University of California at Berkeley and a PhD from Oregon State University. He's authored over 150 scientific manuscripts, and he founded an organization or a company with his wife Eileen called Mycorrhizal Applications, which was the world's largest producer of mycorrhizal fungal inoculum. And Dr. Mike believes fungi should emphasize fun. As a two-time cancer survivor, getting to know this fantastic group of mushrooms has enriched and perhaps saved his life. He believes that a mushroom presentation can not only be accurate and have substance, but be entertaining as well. Dr. Mike is the author of a recent publication, a pocket field guide called Fry, Thrive, or Die, and it describes edible, medicinal, hallucinogenic, and poisonous mushrooms within the Western U.S. The book's full of recipes, medicinal uses, history, and ecology of these significant species. It's an easy, up-to-date guide with culinary, medicinal, and psychedelic uses. We're pleased to welcome Dr. Mike Amaranthus. Dr. Mike?
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited about talking to you today about fungi. Really want to emphasize this being as as important and also as gratifying to you. So if you have questions at the end, it'd be great to get your comments. And I know this organization has a lot of experience in the field. So yeah, give me some of your thoughts and ideas and interests, and we'll just go from there. So with that, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about spring mushrooms, and and also I'll share my screen here, and we'll do a little PowerPoint. See that okay? We talk about spring fruitings. A lot of people don't appreciate that, there's a good winter mushroom crop and spring mushroom crop, and even some mushrooms that seem to fruit in the fall. So we're going to emphasize the winter and spring mushrooms. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's see here. So I'm here for moral support. Let's go back one. I'm here for moral support. I know finding mushrooms, especially for people with less experience, and being safe around mushrooms is super important. So again, questions at the end, we can talk about some of the idiosyncrasies of looking for mushrooms. Morels are obviously the spring mushroom that are the favorite of collectors of all kind, and all ages and all types. Morels are delicious, as you know. Fantastic mushroom, very versatile in the kitchen, and pretty easy to identify. I wrote a book called Fry, Thrive, or Die. It's a fun pocket guide to Western mushrooms. It's got the common, delicious, hallucinogenic, medicinal, and poisonous mushrooms from the U.S., Western U.S. So it's available mostly at REI stores, about 45 REI stores, down to Earth in Eugene, several places in Bend, Salem, and Portland. So the book is doing quite well. I think people are really interested in mushrooms right now. We really haven't had a good pocket guide since David Aurora's All the Rain Promises and More. It's 35 to 40 years old. So it's a good update. David's books are amazing, obviously, great guy. But, definitely need to fine tune what we know about mushrooms that we've learned in the last 3 or 4 decades. So the book breaks out mushrooms into the fry category, the thrive category, the die category, or the fly category. And obviously, some mushrooms are both fry and thrive. They're good edibles, but they're also medicinal mushrooms. So, sort of emphasize some can have more than one designation. And I actually have some morels I found yesterday. See the morels are really coming up right now. Start of the season, and they're big and beautiful. And it's been wet. This is actually a white morel, and kind of the tail end of the yellowfoot chanterelle season, but there's still a few yellowfoot owls, kind of the end of the breeding period there. There's some other oyster mushrooms. So they're coming out on logs, and there's a variety of medicinal mushrooms that are coming up. Turkey tail, reishi, and others are fruiting right now. And chaga, if you're willing to look in people's yards on the birch trees. So I wrote the book basically because there's a lot of interest in where to and when to find mushrooms. Obviously, your club is, very in tune to that for your habitats. But there's really a lot of health benefits that have just recently been developed, and the science is really supporting the medicinal value of mushrooms. And the book handles a lot of the preparation and the storage, and it's got recipes and history and a lot of the interactions with the environment, like wildlife and climate change, much more. A lot of general interest stuff on mushrooms in the environment, and not just the edible ones versus the poisonous ones. And I found a lot of my friends and a lot of people in the community that are just getting started with mushroom hunting are really skeptical about their ability to tell edible mushrooms from a medicinal mushroom and from a poisonous mushrooms. And we're blessed with a lot of fungal diversity in our area, but with that comes a lot of, knowledge to be able to, decipher the medicinal ones or the edible ones from the poisonous ones. And for some mushrooms, we actually don't know their toxicity. So, and a lot of mushrooms in the older guides weren't really here, like Amanita phalloides there at the bottom of the screen. That's one that's really moved into our area, and really all over the world. It's come on the roots of, exotic trees that are planted in the area, and it's really spread from tree to tree. So that's from Lithia Park in Ashland, but yeah, it's very common now as phalloides is, one mushroom can kill several people. So it's really to be avoided. And obviously this is Jeff Lowenfels. Obviously he's written several books on the living soil, a great guy. But you don't go out in the woods and just randomly eat mushrooms. That's a good way to get into some serious problems. But I have a friend that I've been hunting with mushrooms with for nearly 50 years. And he said to me the other day, he said, if you can tell a black and white cat from a skunk, you can learn to identify mushrooms. So with a little experience and a little skill out in the woods, you can learn to identify mushrooms. So this is your first test here. If you can tell the Amanita muscaria on the left from the dog wearing a mushroom outfit on the right, you're well on your way to becoming a mushroom taxonomist. And we've learned so much in the last 35 years, in the last couple hundred years about mushrooms and their edibility and their chemical components and their medicinal benefits and the toxicities within these mushrooms. It's not like the old days where it was trial and error. This is our ancestors 10,000 years ago. And it must have been pretty interesting eating mushrooms back then, pretty dicey. So as you know, mushrooms have characteristics of the caps. Underneath the cap can be gills, it can be teeth, it can be a poroid surface, it could be all kinds of different structures beneath the cap. The stalk can be smooth, there can be a veil, it can be ornamented, it can come out of a vulva at the sac at the base. And how those gills are attached to the stem is pretty critical. If they're free, if they're adnexed or adnate, or they're decurrent running down the stalk, it's really important characteristics, as is the color of the gills and the color with maturity. So taking spore prints is a good way to be able to better tell the color of the spores, which is a critical identification factor. So I want to focus on the spring mushrooms, and obviously morels are one of the best edible mushrooms in the spring. And the cap is covered with pits and ridges. If you slice the mushroom lengthwise, and I have right here, it's hollow in the middle, and the stem is also hollow. See that? Okay. Cap is hollow. Important characteristics. And the cap is attached to the length of the stalk. That's a big part of the thing. And the stalk is always hollow and white. So ways to identify morels. Here's a good diagram. You can see the hollow stem, the hollow cap, the attachment of the cap to the length of the mushroom, and the pits and the ridges that characterize the cap. Those are morels. And really, it doesn't take too long for people to identify toxic lookalikes. They're really not lookalikes. There's obviously the gyrometris, the brain fungi, the one on the left, and then the elfin saddles, the one on the right there. And they slightly resemble morels, but not really. And so it's easy to differentiate these two groups from morels pretty rapidly in the forest or in the field. The one that's a little bit harder to differentiate is the thimble morel, the Verpa bohemica. The texture of the cap is very much like a morel, but it's only connected to the top of the stalk, and the stalk is not hollow. It's pithy on the inside, so it's not hollow. So some people eat Verpas without problems, but I know of over the years, at least of a dozen people that were poisoned by Verpas by either eating too much or maybe they weren't cooked well enough. But you need to be careful with this species. They tend to occur early. They're also called the early morel, earlier in the year than morels, and along riparian areas, stream sides. But keep an eye out for this one. You might try it on a very limited basis and cook it well before you eat it. But some people I know have had problems. You can see the thimble morel is attached only at the top compared to the true morel, which is the cap is attached to the entirety of the stalk. So that's how you tell the difference. And we've got, and I don't want to do too much taxonomy. The book covers morel harvest and habitat and some of the lore around morels and the taxonomy of morels in a lot of detail. So I don't want to spend too much time here, but we are blessed with a lot of morel variety in Southern Oregon and in Eastern and Central Oregon. So the one on the left is the white morel, the Rufobrunescens. The one in the middle is the Esculenta, so the white clade on the left. The center one is the yellow clade, and then the black clade on the right. And we get these natural blacks in the hills that are actually, all of these species are prominently mycorrhizal. And if you're not aware what mycorrhizal fungi are, they're fungi that get their sugars and their energy from the plants. And in exchange, they get moisture and nutrients out of the soil and bring it back to the plant root. So they're like critical to plant growth, but they also rely on the plant for their energy needs. And mycorrhizal fungi is, as you probably know, at least to a limited basis, are very prominent in the Pacific Northwest. We have most of our really good wild edible mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of this fungus, these threads in the soil. This Saturday, if you're available, I'm going to be talking at the Down to Earth for Earth Day on Saturday at 10:30 about mycorrhizal fungi and the role they play in our ecosystem health and climate change issues and wildlife issues and all the roles that mycorrhizal fungi play. So it's been a lifelong love of mine, these fungi associated with the roots of hardwoods and conifers. And a lot of the morel species are actually mycorrhizal. The white morel is also called the mountain blondes. The pits line up vertically along the cap. That's how you tell this clade. And they tend to bruise. You see the little orange, kind of reddish bruising on the ridges of the cap. That's how you tell the mountain blondes and the white clade. And then the esculenta, the pits are more randomly distributed. They aren't vertically distributed along the cap. There's your dominant forest feature, the Bud Light can, empty bud can in the woods, almost as common as mushrooms, the Bud Light can. But those, one of them on the right, actually picked yesterday here in Southern Oregon. So they were associated with madrone. But these are mycorrhizal. They're delicious, like the white morels. They're very delicious and can be quite in abundance. These tend to be predominant in hardwoods, not conifers. And then the black morels, which are, globally distributed, very common, broad, and there's a natural black that occurs in forested conditions. I put a little picture of a morel that's kind of overdone. When they get to this point and they kind of smell a little bit off, or they're very buggy, they should be left in the woods for their spores to disseminate for the next generation of morels. So, keep an eye on your morels before you pick them. Just don't pick anything. If they're too far gone, leave them in the woods. Morels have pits and ridges, and the white morels and the yellow morels tend to have the ridges tend to be lighter colored than the pits themselves, where the black morels, the ridges are darker than the pits themselves. So it's a good way to differentiate the species. And the pit arrangement, the white morels tend to be vertically arranged, and some morels have some vertical arrangement, but the whites tend to be very vertically arranged and more conical and less oval than the other things. Whether you may have not noticed this, but morels have a sinus. So the black morels have an indentation where the stem attaches to the cap, and that indentation is called the sinus. So the black morels have a sinus where the white and blonde morels do not have a sinus. And people always ask me, hey, I found a bunch of morels out in the woods or in the yard. Should I let them grow? Should I just kind of mark them and then, or come back later and harvest them when they're larger? And to be honest, I don't know. We had a study a couple decades ago where we actually put toothpicks in the mushrooms and measured them and monitored, I don't know, maybe 400 mushrooms to see how much they grew. And they didn't grow much after they came up. And I don't know if that's a function of the humidity and the rainfall. And maybe if you had some good moisture in the air or some rainfall, they would grow more. My thoughts are that they probably don't grow much. They come up pretty much full size, and they often come up in this like a wave. They come up from the earth and they kind of open up. The cap kind of opens up. So in my experience, they don't seem to grow much after they first emerge from the soil, but that can vary from year to year. The other problem is if you don't pick them immediately, you have to try and find them, which can be a bit of a challenge, trying to find morels. You think you know where they are, but you go back and you can't find the thing. So, and then we've got the landscape morel, importuna, which likes bark. And a lot of people, this is your introduction to morels, is they'll put fresh bark down and you get maybe a year, sometimes much less fruiting the second year. And certain kinds of bark seem to be better suited for morels than others, but it's a good way to find morels close to home is to put fresh bark down, especially in recently disturbed areas. Then of course, burn morels can be prolific, and they're black morels and they're not mycorrhizal, and the landscape morel is not mycorrhizal either, I don't think. But these black morels, these burn morels, tomentosa, can be quite abundant. Here's David Aurora hiking out of the woods in Alaska. He filled his bags and his buckets. He had to take his pants off and fill them full of morels. Get out of the woods. That's a good morel harvest. Um, and they can be, and that was a burn area, and you can see that burn legacy on the base of the stumps. But burns can be, the commercial hunters get the maps of fire areas, and they actually go around the first year after a fire and sort of look for these massive morel fruitings all over the western United States and up into Alaska. Canada gets the same thing in the fire areas. So it can be a way to really get concentrated collections of morels. And they're delicious. Obviously, they can be prepared so many different ways. Them and the spring kings that we're talking about later here, they're delicious, and the sky's the limit in terms of recipes and uses. They're very meaty, very nutty, kind of a smoky aroma. Delicious and very good for you. But never eat them raw. You guys have probably followed this Montana sushi restaurant that poisoned 50 people with raw morels, and killed two of the people died. Serving raw morels like raw fish, not a good idea. So the two people that died, it's a terrible situation. They weren't in very good health. A lot of people in better health survived, but there's some drastic illnesses associated with that Montana sushi restaurant. Always cook Ascomycetes, and especially morels. And we're blessed in the Pacific Northwest, so many different morel habitats. You can find these things. You never know where you're going to find them. They're so ecologically diverse. So mountains, fires, lawns, disturbed landscapes of all time. They're very opportunistic. So you always have to keep your eyes out for morels. And it's really just starting right now. So it's exciting for people to get out in the woods and look for them. And really, the dangerous lookalikes don't look that much like the morel, except for maybe the verpa. And you cut it in half, and that really is pretty unique habitat, the riparian areas for the verpa. And they tend to fruit a month before the morels. So you shouldn't be in too much trouble there. The Gyromitra on the bottom left is super toxic, especially when eaten raw. It can kill people. So that's one to beware of, the brain fungi and the Gyrometras. I've actually eaten the high elevation Gyrometra, but I didn't think it was very good. And I prepared it right to get rid of all the MMH, the monomethyl hydrazine. And I knew from spending some time with David Aurora, I knew that one was considered edible. And so I ate a little bit, but I felt a little queasy, to be honest with you. So I've never eaten it since. But I would say just avoid Gyrometras in general. And I think, obviously people of all ages can enjoy morel hunting. I think there's something that's magical, joyous, finding morels, especially for young people who, just they're bringing home dinner, and all of the praise they get and the gratitude they get from everybody for their finds. And sometimes the morels are inversely proportional to the size of the people. For you duck fans, that's Cam McCormick on the right. He's still playing for Miami. It's like his ninth year in playing college football, but really nice kid. But you say the size of the mushroom has nothing to do with the size of the person that found it. So I wanted to move on to some other species here. Obviously, the winter chanterelle, which actually is still fruiting. I'll show you one. They're getting pretty dried up and stuff, but the winter chanterelle, also known as the yellowfoot, they tend, as they dry out, they lose their yellowish color. They get to be more tan, but they have folds underneath. They don't have true blade-like gills, and they are delicious, and they can be quite abundant, but you have to pick a lot to get enough for a meal because they're much smaller than the regular chanterelle. So how do you know a yellow chanterelle? They're smaller and more delicate than the true chanterelles. Their stalk is hollow. They occur in the winter and the spring. The folds beneath the cap tend to be very widely spaced. The cap is smooth on the surface, not scaly. And it goes from yellow brown to tannish brown as it dries out. And the top of the cap is usually sunken. It's pretty easy to identify. This is a black trumpet. I don't know how common this is in the Eugene area, but it's very common from Roseburg south and all the way to the Oregon coast, Crescent City. These are delicious. Craterellus cornucopioids, but they're really fruity and delicious to eat. They are a true treasure if you ever find. They're hard to find. They tend to be in the leaves of oaks and madrones. And if there's a lot of shadows, they're really hard to find because they're so black. But these are a great spring mushroom. You see them at markets, etc. I want to talk a little bit about the Pacific golden chanterelle. It's fall only, of course, but it's so prevalent in the Eugene area and all the way to Central Oregon and into the Coast Range that it's just a great species. And we actually have several chanterelle species in our area, and they're big and they're meaty and they're fun to find. And of course, the book has a big chapter on it, how to find them and dangerous lookalikes, etc. But they tend to be trumpet shaped and wavy, and obviously folds instead of blade-like gills. They tend to be egg yellow colored, but there are white chanterelles at higher elevations, which are also quite delicious. And the yellow chanterelle can sometimes have a more dull yellow rather than the golden yellow color. So the interior flesh is pure white, and it's got a nice smell, mild smell, kind of a fruity smell to it. And if you pull the flesh apart, it comes out in string-like pieces like string cheese. The one that can be mistaken for the chanterelles is it used to be Gompus flacosus, but now it's Turbinellus flacosus. It's the scaly fall chanterelle, and it's got scales on the cap. And the top of the cap is much more orange than the stalk, which tends to be much lighter in color. Chanterelles have sometimes the stalk and the folds can be lighter than the top of the cap as well, but not as dramatically as this one. But it's always scaly. This will not kill you. The scaly fall chanterelle won't kill you, but I've seen a lot of people have severe gastric problems eating this. So be careful what you put in the bag in the fall, because they tend to occur very close to the chanterelles. And so you can mistake them and put them in the bag. This is the one you really got to look out for, the jack-o'-lantern on the left compared to the chanterelle. It's got true gills, and it's really to be avoided. It can cause serious toxicities and even death. So that's one you got to really know that. And the gills actually separate from the stalk. So if you run your finger across the gills, they'll break off, where the chanterelles don't do that. This is one that some people eat, but gives a lot of people problems. It's actually, some people have indicated it's got some psychoactive kinds of characteristics. So this is the fall chanterelle, Hygrophorapsis, and it looks a lot like a chanterelle, I mean, color-wise, but it has gills and not folds. The base tends to be much finer, much thinner than the robust base of the chanterelle. So that's one that's very common in the forest as well, and can occur in the spring. Here's one you can't mistake for anything. This is the hedgehog. Notice it's got teeth underneath the cap and not gills or pores. There are no dangerous lookalikes for the hedgehogs. For me, it's got a lot of the same consistency of a chanterelle, but it's very good to eat. Hedgehogs are very common in the Cascades and along the coast. We do get some fruitings of psilocybin mushrooms, in this winter and spring. This is the Liberty Cap, a mildly psychedelic species, occurs primarily along the coast. Here's one that you would find more from an interior standpoint. It's often found in bark. This is the wavy cap, psilocybe sinensis, and it's very powerful. People tend to think that psychedelics was just a 60s thing, but psychedelics in human use have been coexisted for thousands of years, from North America, Central America, South America, Europe, Northern Europe, Greece, Africa, Siberia. In some places, Amanita muscaria is still used ceremoniously, like in places of Siberia, where it is used as an intoxicant. So there's all kinds of stories out there, and the book covers a lot of these, the Fry, Thrive, or Die book. But, like the Vikings, the berserkers are said to have consumed Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric before they went into battle. All kinds of stories about Santa Claus and Amanita muscaria. And there are some recent videos of like reindeer in Siberia and Finland eating Amanita muscaria and dancing around and rolling around and acting crazy. So flying reindeer, I don't know. Santa with the red outfit and the white buttons, I don't know. He's pretty jolly, which is one of the side effects of eating these intoxicants. But you got to be careful with that one. And there's actually the panther amanita, different than the fly agaric, has a lot of the same properties as the fly agaric, and it's also very common in the spring, unlike Amanita muscaria, which tend to be summer and fall. So Amanita muscaria is your classic red mushroom with the white tops. If you're going to eat the psychedelic ones that you find in the woods, be very careful. You got to really do a spore print because there are a lot of little brown mushrooms that are toxic. This is one that's deadly, the deadly Galerina morginata. So it's got a rusty brown and brown spore print where see on the left there, the psilocybe, this is cubensis, the golden teacher. It's got the chocolate brown spore print, and all the psilocybes are purple brown spore prints primarily. So spore prints are important for anybody that's collecting little brown mushrooms. This is the one I was talking about, the panther. It's an agaric, similar properties to the Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric on the left there. And I think it's actually has higher levels of read some papers where the levels of toxins in this one are actually higher than Amanita muscaria for certain strains. So it's very common in the spring. A lot of people go through, if they do eat these, they get pretty sick, gastric and just feeling of discomfort. This is the spring king, Boletus rexvaris. These are truly a delight in the woods. They tend to be May and can fruit into the third week of June. Higher elevations in the forest. They can be quite large. They tend to be a lot less buggy than the fall boletes. And they can, one bolete can feed several people. They get quite large and meaty. And the nice thing about them is that you can actually dry them. I dry them and dry, and they keep forever dried. They actually are better dried and rehydrated. You get more of the bolete flavor from drying, I think. It takes the moisture out. Very nutty, delicious in a wide range of culinary uses. So it's a good one. It's kind of a lot of people don't know about this spring bolete fruiting. It's fun to hunt them in the woods. But usually you have to go pretty high up, above 4,000 feet, to really get into the spring kings. Like I say, they can be quite abundant. We tend, when we mushroom hunt, especially, you show a lot of pictures like this, people think that mushroom hunting is like finding mushrooms like the mushroom on the left, when in most cases mushrooms are mushrumps. They're just humps out in the woods. They're pushing up from the forest floor, or either they're cracks in the soil, or they're cracks in the duff, and you got to kind of dig around them, especially to get the young specimens. So, it's hard for people that are just starting to mushroom hunt sometimes, because they think that they're not seeing these big, beautiful sporocarps that are fruiting above the soil surface. So in a lot of cases, you got to just look for either some animal digs, because a lot of times the animals will dig around for them, or just pushes from the forest floor where there's a lot of ground cover, etc. So it takes a keen eye to find them for beginners. And then obviously for the boletes, which have these poroid, so beneath the cap or a series of pores, sponge layer. I encourage people to avoid bleach staining boletes. Most of them are poisonous. This one is the Boletus santanus, which is really causes severe gastric. It actually it's been known to kill at least one person, but most people just they wish they were dead. Let's put it that way. That's the Satan's bolete. Most of the mushrooms that you'll find in the fall and the spring with a porous cap underneath the cap with a sponge layer are actually Suillus species. And they're distinguished by their caps, which are viscid caps. They're called slippery jacks because the caps are quite slippery. It's kind of like a gel-like cutin cover of the cap. A lot of them have veils on the stem. But Suillus are very common in our region. I've eaten them. They're not very good. I guess if you were starving to death in the woods and you were out of food, you eat some Suillus species, but they're generally not considered a culinary species, but maybe there are some species out there that are edible if you pull the slimy layer from the top of the cap. But this is mostly what you're going to find in the fall and the spring that have a sponge-like layer underneath the cap. White truffles. The white truffle on the right was just found in Eugene a couple of weeks ago, just outside of Eugene. The white truffles can be quite good, especially if they're mature. And that's the problem. Some of the harvesters don't differentiate the mature ones from the immature ones. The immature ones have absolutely no value. They have no aroma, no taste. So, but as they mature, that garlicky, earthy, undescribable truffle scent becomes a lot more prominent. And the white truffle on the left is actually from Italy. And the one on the right is from the Eugene area. The Oregon white truffles can rival the Italian white truffles if you find them when they're mature. Sometimes people are selling them in markets. They use dogs to find them. The nice thing about using the dog is that the dogs only get the mature ones. And so that's the kind of ones that you want to eat. Is the maturity is everything when it comes to white truffles. Sometimes they're sold in markets. Before you buy it, get a good whiff of it to really tell if it's going to have that distinguishable white truffle scent. We do have some black truffles. There's quite a few truffiers or truffle orchards planted in the Eugene area. Not many of them are really producing very well. This is from a truffle orchard I was partners with in Australia, and it's black truffle. And we produce a lot of truffles, and we send them all over the world. But the host plant, they're mycorrhizal, obviously, and the host plant is hazels and oaks primarily, a few other species like ilex. but they can be quite spendy, obviously. Not as expensive as the white truffles, but they're often, in the $400 to $600 a pound range. So if you've never had a good truffle meal, and you get the opportunity, it's worth a try. I think they're probably a little bit overrated for the cost of the mushroom, but it is delicious. So, and a lot of these troufiers in Southern Oregon and Central Oregon, and just, the conditions for whatever reason just haven't been right for the fruiting. It does take a lot of maintenance of the soil conditions to get it to be right, and you really need to use a dog to only get the mature specimens and stuff. So it takes 5 to 7 years for truffles to start producing, and there's really a lot of maintenance to that, and finding quality trees that are loaded with the mycorrhizae of the black truffle is key. But tuber melanosporum, the majority of the black truffles in the world now are produced in plantations and not from wild collections. What's really happened in this has kind of been a renaissance of the medicinal mushrooms, and what we're learning about their ability to boost the immune system and inhibit tumor growth, cancer growth, how they help with inflation, stimulate brain function, killer T cells. And, we share our common ancestry with mushrooms, and they produce a lot of compounds that plants do not produce. High levels of beta glucans and complex polysaccharides, chitins, melanins, high levels of not only vitamins, but micronutrients, minerals, polyphenols, ergothioneine. I'll talk a little bit about that because I'm very interested in that. And then the antioxidant concentrations of some of these mushrooms is off the chart. Triterpenoids, which have strong anti-cancer kinds of characteristics. So if you want to really look at the research, Paul Stamets has a really good website called mushroomreferences.com, and he actually posts the entire studies or the abstracts of the studies, so you can actually read the studies yourself. And he's got it broken up by, hen of the woods, or, he's got chaga, reishi, he's got each lion's mane, so you can look it up for your particular species that you're interested in. You can see the research, and he adds new research to the site, constantly. So every week it seems like there's new research studies coming out. The one that I actually just published a study in Food Nutrition Journal on ergothioneine. It's super high in boletes, but all fungi have much higher levels of ergothioneine compared to plants. Some people have termed it the longevity vitamin, and it's only produced by fungi. That's how it gets into the food chain. So eating mushrooms is really important as a source of ergothioneine, and it's got all kinds of benefits. Really a lot of studies, especially in Asia, and now starting in North America, where they looked at ergothioneine and, why care about it? Well, it helps people live a longer and better life. The data is some of the number of subjects in these studies was thousands. And a lot of times they looked at periods of 20 or 30 years. So there really is a lot of science, and there's getting more and more here in North America, but Asia and Europe has been the primary source of research studies on this particular compound, ergothioneine. But some pretty riveting data on heart health, brain health, and cancer prevention. The ergothioneine is an amino acid that actually enters the mitochondria in your cells and increases the longevity of the cells. Actually, quite some good research in that. So it's a fungal produced compound. And I've written another paper on how it gets in the food chain in terms of agriculture. And mycorrhizal fungi are common, have a symbiotic relationship with some of our important crop species like corn, soybeans, all kinds of vegetables, etc. And so it's the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil that actually, produce this compound and let it enter the plant. So plants that are produced without mycorrhizal fungi tend to have little or none of this ergothioneine in them. So how it naturally enters the food chain is via the mycorrhizal fungi, these endomycorrhizae in the soil. So good farming practices that promote mycorrhizal fungi encourage much higher levels of ergothioneine in plants and that's how it gets in the food chain. So it's why, buying food that's organically produced or regenerative agriculture kinds of situations. I'll have some in my talk on Saturday at Down to Earth. I'll talk specifically about how you can grow your own food to encourage higher ergothioneine concentrations in the food. But like I say, there's a lot of unique substances in fungi, and the turkey tail's got this PSK, which is really a very potent anti-cancer agent. PSK is used very commonly in Asian countries as a cancer treatment, and they actually grow turkey tail mycelium, and that's used in the medicine. And a lot of medicines are derived from fungi. So you can make teas out of turkey tail. It's very common. It likes hardwood species. It's very common in our region. You can usually quite abundant. You can actually buy capsules of all these fungi almost anywhere now. Costco, Amazon's got hundreds of mycorrhizal, fungal tonics and tinctures and capsules, etc. Another one that's just been used for thousands of years is the reishi species, called the mushroom of immortality in China and Japan, but ours is the artist conch. You see these in like gift shops where they actually draw on the underneath of the conch. They do art, etc. So quite common in our area, artist conch. And is also I've actually got one here. The artist conch, very common. This is the varnish conch, also quite common. You can, if you keep they tend to be on down logs, stumps, standing coal trees that are in decline. So it's easy to get an ample harvest by carrying a hatchet in the woods or some way to knock it off the plant. You can take it home and dry it and make your own teas. This makes actually a delightful tea. This is chaga. Doesn't look like much, but it's got powerful immune support. It's 8,000 times more antioxidants than blueberries. I think it's like 70% melanin, which is really good for your hair, your eyes, your skin. It only grows on birch trees. So in its natural environment, it's like Maine, Canada, Alaska, Northern Europe, Siberia, very common. But it's been used for thousands of years as well as a tea. And it makes it like a delightful tea. It's got vanilla tones to it. So, but you find it in city areas. You'd find it in Eugene just on people's birch trees. It tends to be very common. So how much of these tinctures and powders to use? Most of the clinical trials, if you actually look at the research data on the medicinal trials, they used the therapeutic dose was 3 grams or 3,000 milligrams. So if your coffee or brew has 100 milligrams in there, you'd have to drink 30 cups of coffee to get your therapeutic dose. So you're better off kind of looking at the label and to see how much of these medicinal mushrooms are actually in there. Taking the actual capsules of, say, turkey tail or reishi is probably going to get you closer to that therapeutic dosage for those mushrooms. And like I say, there's powders available in health food stores and even large conventional stores now that were never available in the old days. So it's kind of exciting that way, but make sure you're taking enough to get the benefit. And the other one too that I should talk about a little bit is I've got one here. Lion's mane. This is delicious. It tastes like seafood. It is so good to eat. And it's been domesticated. So a lot of people are growing them. You can grow it on kits, but you can find it a lot in markets now. And it's, promotes brain health. I found it a few times out in the woods, but I generally purchase it. But tastes like seafood. It's got really kind of a crab kind of taste to it. And it's super delicious and really good for the brain. So we're not the only people that eat mushrooms, and we're not the only animals that eat mushrooms. So, mushrooms in a lot of societies are pretty broadly used, but also broadly used by a variety of animal species. I've seen elk and bear eat fungi. A lot of small mammals eat fungi. Some animals, like the flying squirrel, it's 90% of their diet. And a lot of marsupials, places like Australia, um, there are a lot of animals very dependent on some of these possum species. It's also 90% of their diet. So very important in wildlife food chains. And also they're important from a climate change standpoint. A recent study came out where they found that 36% of the total global carbon dioxide emissions are captured annually by fungi. So this mycelial network beneath the soil surface is sequestering 36% of the annual CO2 emitted in the atmosphere, which is more than China produces every year. So how we manage our soils is a big part of our ability to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere where it does a lot of damage and put it in the soil where it benefits us from a soil health standpoint, from a food quality standpoint, et cetera. So we need to look for ways to put mycelial networks into soils, especially disturbed lands. We've sort of lost that fungal network in these highly disturbed lands. So a good way to put them back is to inoculate. There are numerous mycorrhizal inoculum products out there. And so by putting them on your soil or on your seed or in the plant hole upon transplanting, you can develop your own mycorrhizal network on your plants. And it's one of the benefits of that is only, healthier plant growth, but also you can use less fertilizer and less water in the growth of the plant because you've got this expanded root system. So I'm wrapping up. I know it's kind of, I wish we could have had some questions during the session because I want to hear from you as well. But I mean, there's a lot of, we tend to like to, collect mushrooms for their culinary value, and they are delicious, but they serve so many different aspects of our life that we just kind of take for granted. Our atmosphere, our health, the whole ecosystem depends on these fungi. We sort of take it for granted. And the book is really a celebration of, all things fungi. It's got the common edible and poisonous and medicinal hallucinogenic ones, but it talks more about the importance of fungi to the planet and to the humans species. So it's been a lifetime of adventure for me. 48 years of studying fungi, and I'm still learning a lot about fungi and how they affect our environment and how they affect our refrigerators. So, and the nice thing about the Willamette Valley is that in every direction there's mushrooms. It's really kind of live in a mushroom paradise. You can go north, south, east, and west and get into some pretty amazing habitat. Drier to wetter environments, higher to lower elevations, different aspects, different soil types. Really is kind of a cornucopia of mushroom opportunity. And there's a lot of joy. I think as humans, we were sort of meant to hunt and gather and not just stare at our cell phones. And there's something unusual about these days about finding your own wildland foods in the woods, but there's also some great gratitude to be able to find a healthy meal from your own hunting and gathering experience. So if you're going to do it, make it magic, not tragic, and fun, not done, inspiration, not expiration, and visions, not vomit. If you're going to be out there, make sure you know what you're eating. If when in doubt, throw it out, as David Aurora always says. And it really is an important principle to know when you're out hunting mushrooms. And I hope your morel season goes well. I think it's starting pretty well. Hopefully this will be you spilling buckets of morels on the beautiful meadow, and encourage young people to get out there and harvest. Is sort of a joyous experience for kids to find mushrooms and get all the acclaim and the attention from adults. And they're actually quite good at it. I mean, a lot of these kids they learn pretty quick about mushrooms and which species. I wrote a book called children's book called Mycorrhiza, just kind of for my own grandkids, because I think kids need to know where food comes from and what the earth does for everything. And in this case, it's Mycorrhiza as he's a miner, he's a wizard, he's a carpenter, he's an explorer, a doctor, a conductor, an internet expert, and a plant's best friend. So it's kind of a nice way. It's in a lot of schools and libraries now, and it's all the things that mycorrhizae do for us and the planet. It's beautifully illustrated. Kids need to know the importance of fungi in their life. So that was a fun project. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and Paul Stamets has it on his website, fungi.com. There's Paul there. And then the book, Fry, Thrive, or Die, I'll be signing books at Down to Earth at about 11:30 this Saturday. Most REIs have the book. Paul liked the book. He's in there a lot. Got some stories about Paul. And anyway, it's going well. And I really am thankful for people like Paul who kind of spread the word about mushrooms and their importance. And he did it in a time when it really wasn't very popular. He just kind of stayed on it. And he's like David Aurora and people like Jim Trappy that just, were very persistent and charismatic and made it work. So thank you very much, Cascade Mycological Society. I'm willing to answer some questions to the best of my ability. And I'll be at Down to Earth Saturday at 11:30 if you want to check out a book or want me to sign a book, etc. So with that, I don't know, Chris or Matt, you turn me back over to the general audience.
Okay. Matt, do we have any questions from the YouTube chat?
We have a hearty greeting from Mike Laneoff.
Oh, wow. 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 Mike and I roomed together in the 70s, I think, in Grants Pass. How you doing, Michael? Wherever you are.
Well, that's a nice blast from the past. Do we have anybody else out there asking questions from Dr. Mike?
We have one question so far, and that is, have you tried to grow morels now that there's morel spawn available?
Wow. Well, people have been saying that they have the secret to growing morels for all 50 years I've been involved with fungi. There's a Dutch group that seems to be pretty good at it. And those mushrooms that poison the people in Montana were actually from China, were produced domestically. The morels have really been resistant to domestication. And I know there was Harry Tiers, who was a professor in San Francisco. His student had a patent for growing morels that he sold to the University of Michigan. And they produced for a couple of years and then they stopped producing. So The Netherlands group, if you go to the website, just keyword Netherlands domestic morel production, you'll see what they have going. They seem to be producing, but I've never seen morels commercially available, despite decades of people saying they've discovered the secret. So I would not trust any kit. I purchased kits in the past and they didn't do very. I got maybe one morel if I were lucky, and more than 50% of them I didn't get anything. So, and I followed the instructions pretty carefully. So I don't know. These Dutch guys really seem to have the morels form sclerotia in the fall, which are these little hairy nut-like things in the soil. So they have to do a sclerotia formation period early on. And I think that they're producing black morels and they're actually using an endomycorrhizal host for that strain that they have. And they've got grass involved. So the energy is not coming from the soil, it's actually coming from the grass in their beds. And of course, they control the humidity in these tents, et cetera, and the light. So anyway, it's a long-winded answer where I would not have any kits.
Any other questions for Dr. Mike?
No, a lot of thank yous, and Mike Lanoff says he's doing fine, and I'll see you Saturday at Down to Earth.
Oh, sweet. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mike. We appreciate you zooming in and giving us a talk, and we look forward to your appearance at Down to Earth Saturday. I had down 10:30, so I'm not sure if the
10:30 is the mycorrhizal talk. But
okay.
if you wanted to check out the book, 11:30, and you can sign a book. But if you're interested in the mycorrhizal effects for Earth Day, on kind of mycorrhizal effects on the ecosystem, come at 10:30 because it'll be a completely different slideshow. Just dealing with the effects of mycorrhizae.
A couple more questions sneaking in too. Do you have an opinion on going off trails to find mushrooms? Some of them told it's important to stay on forest trails.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think, foot traffic doesn't do a lot of compaction if it's just kind of random across the landscape. Compaction, I think, and erosion would be the big factors if you were compacting the soil, because mycorrhizal fungi the filaments do not like compaction. Sometimes compacted areas are actually better fruiting areas because it brings the mycelium to the surface and then they produce the fruiting bodies. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of really popular grounds that produce for long periods of time. So I'm not too concerned about it, but you don't want to rake and you don't want to create a situation where you have a lot of erosion.
And I would think one of the big concerns is going off trail looking for mushrooms is just the potential for getting lost. not necessarily the impact on the environment, but the impact on the individual. There have been quite a few people that have been lost, and there was a number within the last decade near Eugene from a lost mushroom hunter. So always a good idea to go with somebody, let somebody know where you're going, take your cell phone and GPS and all those precautions.
It's scary getting lost in the woods. I've been lost a couple times, and never for more than a couple hours. But your head's down. If you're especially on flat land, kind of lose your bearing. It's a cloudy day. You don't really know where the sun is. I mean, it can get pretty. Your adrenaline can start pumping. And you really don't know where you're at, and kind of wandering. So yeah, be careful.
Yeah, go sideways pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Do you have any concerns with harvesting morels in burn areas?
Yeah, my concern is I don't get enough of them. I don't have any concerns about that. I think, you're harvesting the fruit of the fungus that's in the soil. So they tend to be very ephemeral anyway. There's going to be far fewer fungi the next year. I think the important thing is if they're overripe, than leave them out there, because the spores mature pretty late for morels, and they float in the wind vast areas. They float for hundreds of miles. So if you're not going to either leave it out there to get the spores to disseminate, and also use I don't know how much Chris and Matt talk about this, but I'm a firm believer in using mesh bags. So when you're walking around, you're actually moving spores from place to place, because a lot of the productivity in terms of mushroom production is caused by these mixing of ecotypes within a species. So if you're out in the woods and if you put your mushroom bag down, a mesh mushroom bag down, and then you look when you pick it up, there's little flecks of morel pits and ridges that you leave on the soil surface. So in a sense, you're a vector for morels. And that's why I think, like, for the natural blacks, et cetera, and some of the blondes and the white and yellow morels, is that some of the places that I've been collecting for decades are actually more productive now than they used to be. And I think some of that is just people are collecting and moving them around. So it seems to be pretty sustainable, at least for mycorrhizal morels.
Yeah, and a lot of people have concerns with like fire retardants and remnants from firefighting operations.
Oh yeah,
with burn morels.
That's a whole different ballgame. I know absolutely nothing about that. I know the fire retardant is pretty crazy chemical. So yeah, that might be. I hadn't even thought of that. It would not be good because fungi do accumulate chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Like at Chernobyl, they're actually using this one, using oyster mushroom mycelium to clean up radioactive material. They actually use this for oil spills too, because it can degrade hydrocarbons. It's this Pleurotus is amazing. The oyster mushrooms are amazing, but they actually have shown this they detoxify radioactive cesium in soils. So they have a strain that does that. So, but yeah, you wouldn't want to eat it after it absorbed cesium. Yeah, a bad decision. And there's places in Northern Europe, because of Chernobyl, there's places in Northern Europe that are off, that they do not allow mushroom collection.
And one more question came in. How many dangerous species are there in Oregon? What are they? And how many edible species are there?
That's
an easy one.
That's a question for Chris. Chris, you want to get us on it?
I would say there are probably innumerable mushroom species out there. We have huge numbers of undescribed mushroom species, even here in Oregon, where we've got a lot of mycologists working on it. So to quantify how many edible and poisonous mushroom species are out there is kind of a tough question. It would be a guess.
So
a lot.
Obviously a question for Matt then. I saw a paper years ago that there was 4,000 fungal species that associate with the roots of Douglas fir over its range. Think about
4,000 different species.
Yeah, 4,000 fungal species associate with Douglas fir over its range. And Douglas fir has crazy range, but I mean, it gives you some idea. There's thousands of mushroom species in Oregon for sure. And a lot of them you don't even see. There's hundreds of truffle species in Oregon too. So,
and more being found all the time. We had a recent speaker who's a recipient of our Freeman Rowe educational scholarship, who's doing her graduate work on truffle diversity under oaks and burned and unburned sites.
Right.
And seemingly every time she goes out, she finds new species of truffles.
Yeah, oaks are great, and especially in the spring, you get a lot of truffle species in the spring. That you tend to get more mushroom species in the fall and more hypogeas or truffle species in the spring. I've done a lot of collecting under oaks over the years in the spring, and yeah, there's a lot of unique things that are just crazy that we don't even know about it. So
Very true. There's always room for more mycological researchers out there. We just wish we had unlimited funding, and maybe
yeah,
we
and
could.
sometimes it's not just the funding; it's the ability of someone like Paul did, were to capture the imagination of people to the benefits and the opportunity. So Paul's done such a great job, like Fantastic Fungi and some of the books that he's written. He just sort of developing an enthusiastic, base of people that are interested in fungi. And back in the early '80s when he started Fungi Perfecti, everybody just thought he was as a quack, but it turned out a lot of things he said were absolutely true, on some of the medicinal and hallucinogenic fungi and some of the things about diversity and stuff. So, he's been proven over time to be pretty accurate about some of this stuff. So, yeah, he's good. And then my major professor in college was Jim Trappy, and he's named 300 species of fungi, maybe 400 species and genera and families. He's discovered families of fungi. And back then, when they looked at the fungus on the roots of trees, they thought they were pathogens. And he said, no, I think these are improving the growth of trees, not attacking the roots of trees. And I mean, some of the papers, he wrote papers in 1959. Jim is still living. He's 93, 94. He's still living in the Corvallis area, but I have a little dedication to him in the back of the book. It's, just kind of thanking him for everything he's done. He's a great guy.
He's an amazing guy. We've had him speak several times in the past, including when his Trees, Truffles, and Beasts book came out quite a few years ago, which I still think is quite a real approachable ecological scientific view of the mycorrhizal relationship, both here in North America and in Australia, showing you the diversity of what's out there fungally. Pretty cool.
Yeah, Chris Mazer too is one of those guys that was very his co-author. He's very charismatic, and back in the old days, people didn't really care about small mammals, but Chris figured out it was really important to their dietary needs. So yeah, Jim is still amazing. His mind is still sharp as a tack.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Dr. Mike. Do we have any final questions for Dr. Amaranthus before we let him go?
Looks like a couple more coming in. Do you have any tips for inoculating oak trees with truffles?
Yeah, I do. Put them in a blender with some distilled water, and then dilute that blender's worth of sludge and water it in, and just do it when the roots are active. So it could be either in the spring or the fall. But yeah, you can simply take sporocarps, and almost all the truffles work, but for the mushrooms, not all species work as spore inoculum. But yeah, put them in a blender, dilute them with water, and just water them in. Most of the roots are the top 6 inches, so you want to use enough water after you inoculate the soil to kind of move the soils off the surface. But yeah, I've done a lot of tree inoculation over the years, and you just got to get the spores in connection with the root zone and let nature do its thing that it's done for 100 million years.
Nice.
All right, that's all we got.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. One final note for CMS members, our annual meeting is coming up soon. If you'll be getting a reminder email, hopefully tomorrow, to let you know that our annual meeting is and Mushroom Grill Out is coming up, then you need to go online, log in, and register. So that's all we have. Thank you again, Dr. Mike Amaranthus. And Dr. Mike will be at Down the Earth this Saturday. Thanks again.
Bye, guys. Thank you. See you, Chris. Bye, Matt.
Bye.
Good night.